How do you go about studying polyrhythms? Part 1, I asked the question, what is rhythm and how does changing the rhythm impact the sound to the listener? And in part 2, I just read back some of your answers because I want to reflect back on you how convoluted this simple question is to the drumming community at large. Here in part 3, we're going to talk about my answer. Before I give you my definition of rhythm, I'd love for you to double tap this video and show me that you like this content. And of course, make sure to follow me so you can be up on all of my current drum lessons. So what is rhythm? 3 words. Rhythm is notes. Now, if you want to get more specific, rhythm is the notes that you perform over the beat. Now, what happens commonly with the answers to these questions is they conflate rhythm and beat. They define the beat as the rhythm. And in layman's terms, if you ask a person off the street that's not a musician what rhythm is, they'll say it's the ability to hear the beat, to hear the time. Like a dancer, that dancer's got a great sense of rhythm. What that person should be saying is that person's got a great sense of meter, because meter is how you perceive or how you listen to the beat. And meter is often portrayed through rhythm, through the notes that you're playing. In other words, people aren't hearing this when they listen to music. They're hearing this. When a person's listening to you play, they're listening to the rhythms, the notes that you're playing. You are internally or physically hearing the beat, which is like your metronome or your conductor or your physical count, your internal clock that you're counting in your head. That's the beat. Everything that you're performing is notes or rhythms that you're playing over the beat. And yes, that means a lot of the definitions that some of you put down in the comments are technically correct. My challenge with book definitions that sound very smart, they're hard to understand. So when you start talking about the rhythm is units of sound that are put together in a form over a metric time, and you start going into stuff like that, that's confusing. Everyone understands what a note is, even non-musicians. So if you say rhythm is notes, it's a lot clearer. The second part of my question, probably the more important part, how does changing the rhythm impact the sound to the listener? Well, when I say changing the rhythm, what I'm talking about is changing the notes. And when we do that, it gives the listener the impression of going faster and slower. But we do that without changing the beat or the pulse. So to clarify, here's your beat. And if I start playing quarter notes, that's the rhythm. Quarter note triplets. Eighth notes. Eighth note triplets. Sixteenths. Notice how it sounds like it's getting faster? Basically what I'm doing is I'm just cutting into the beat with more subdivisions of notes. And that gives me a faster sound to the listener. But since a drummer's job is to keep the beat, changing those rhythms gives the illusion that I'm going faster and slower. I'm not really changing the tempo of the beat. That stays constant. And that is what rhythm does. But what is polyrhythm? Well, let's talk about that word, polyrhythm. What does poly mean? Poly anything means many, multiple. And we've just discussed how rhythm means notes. So polyrhythm means multiple notes. 2 kinds of notes occupying the same space in time over the beat. But polyrhythms in general are not a specific set of notes. The thing that's really important is the ratio. In other words, a 4/3 polyrhythm is not always dotted eighth notes against quarter notes. This is where musicians tend to get a little confused. So it's easier to explain it by just demonstrating it. So first we're going to set the beat. And for simplicity, I'm going to say this is 3/4 time. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. That also means that if you play these beats, these are quarter notes. Okay? So now I'm going to play those quarter notes with the bass drum. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to play dotted eighth notes on the pad here. 1 E, a 2 E, and a 3 E, and a 1 E, and a 2 E, and a 3 E, and a 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1. So you see how that's a 4 against 3 polyrhythm? Because both those rhythms are happening simultaneously over the beat. And they occupy the same space in that time. So they resolve after 3 beats of time. Now let's keep that same tempo. And we'll say this is 4/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 4. But I'm going to play 16 notes here and triplets here. That's a 4/3 polyrhythm, but it resolves after 1 beat. So it's still the same ratio, but it's a much more condensed piece of time before it resolves. Right there, I just showed you 2 examples of the same polyrhythm resolving after 3 beats and resolving after 1 beat. And if it's a ratio, it's a polyrhythm. If I do a polyrhythm like this, same tempo, but I play eighth notes here and I play quarter notes here, that's a 2-to-1 ratio. There's two rhythms occupying the same space and time, and they resolve, in this case, after one beat. Drum set players use that all the time, but it's still a polyrhythm. We just don't think of it like that because of how evenly it resolves. It's kind of become common that polyrhythm means complicated. Polyrhythm means really difficult rhythms, really crazy things that take forever to resolve. Both of these examples are polyrhythms, even though one is seemingly more common and even. Again, there's this misconception that in common practice, polyrhythms have to be complicated. But being complicated or taking longer to resolve or being more odd does not make it any more or less a polyrhythm. Polyrhythm exists inside or in between those standard rhythms that we're all used to. Let's backtrack to the quarter triplets. So the quarter triplet exists in between those two even anchors, the quarter notes and the eighth notes. So that's what polyrhythms do. If the purpose of rhythm is to make it sound like it's getting faster and slower, the polyrhythms are just those micro units that can go in between your standard rhythms that everyone's used to. And if you learn them, it could give you the illusion of very gradually speeding up or slowing down without losing the beat. And you could get really deep into those in-between rhythms by using polyrhythms. So how do we find those rhythms? You start with the main ratio. For example, 4-3, like we did before, the dotted eighth note. Now, what if we take the 4-3 polyrhythm and we just subtract one number from each of those? 4 minus 1 is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. That means a 4-3 polyrhythm and a 3-2 polyrhythm are very close in sound because they're only one number away from each other. Here's a 4-3 polyrhythm. Here's a 3-2. Slightly faster. 4-3. 3-2. One resolves after 3 beats, one resolves after 2 beats, but they're very close in sound. So if you put those two sounds together, it gives the listener this illusion of stretching. A concept that in lessons John Riley explained to me as elasticity. It sounds like you're playing something that's elastic. It stretches. But you're doing that without losing the beat. Okay. So now all of this is well and good, but how do you actually find the polyrhythms? Well, since polyrhythms are math, there's a formula. So polyrhythms are written one number colon another number. So 4:3, 5:7, 8:6. And the way I teach it is the first number represents the rhythm. So you have to find a rhythm that works with that first number. So if it's a 4, to me, the first rhythm that comes to mind is 16th notes, because commonly 16th notes are 4 per beat in common time. So if a polyrhythm starts with 4, I immediately think 16th notes. The second number talks about the grouping, how you want to group those 16th notes. And when I say grouping, I'm talking about how we're accenting those 16th notes. So if the 16th notes are here, and I grouped them in 4, it works right with the beat. But if I grouped them in 3, notice that sound? Pass the bread and butter. Pass the bread and butter. There's a 4-3 polyrhythm. So I just started with a rhythm of 16 notes, the 4. I grouped them in 3. Now I'm going to drop out all the notes in between. And since it's math, that formula works for any polyrhythm you could think of. Now, that being said, you're going to get guys in the comments that are going to say, okay, do 127 against 563. Does it work? Yes, it does. But it's not remotely practical. So like anything, you could go down the rabbit hole and make it super convoluted. But at some point, you have to decide for yourself, where's the value in this? How far do I want to take it? Am I just doing it for the sake of studying polyrhythms to say, look, I could do this crazy polyrhythm? Or is it something that you can actually use in a musical situation? And that's not just for polyrhythm. That goes for any kind of note. Because yes, we have quarter notes. We have eighth notes. We have 16th notes. We have 32nd notes. We have 64th notes. We technically have 128th notes. We technically have 256 notes. We technically have 512th notes. And just because in theory you can do it, does that mean you're ever going to really have to read 512th notes? I'm going to venture probably not, unless that composer is just trying to be a wise ass. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still understand the theory. Okay, so to wrap up this very long lesson, what is rhythm? Rhythm is notes. It's notes that you play over the beat. What is the beat? The beat is the time. It's the count. What is polyrhythm? Polyrhythm is 2 or more notes occupying the same beat in time. How does changing rhythm, including polyrhythm, impact the sound to the listener? It gives the illusion of going faster and slower without changing the beat. And going all the way back to the original comment, I hope that answers your question. Now, if you want to go deeper into rhythm and study all aspects of drumming and really have a clear path to becoming a great drummer, check out my Study the Drums app. In addition to all the drum lessons and courses that teach you this stuff, I also have tons of practice routines. It's all about helping you stay on track with practicing. And the way you do it is basically looking over my shoulder and practicing along with me. So all the routines that I do in practice, I've recorded, I've put on that app, and you can practice right along with me. The link will be on my bio, on my channel, in my profile. Check out the Study the Drums app and let me help you learn how to practice with purpose and get better at the drums. Thanks so much for checking out the lesson, and remember to always practice with purpose.